It's something we hear all the time on alternative media. The US is in decline, its days of empire are over, and the US dollar is soon to wither away into nothing as inflation runs unchecked. The developing world is catching up and already dominates the real industry of the world. Within 5 years, China will have a larger economy, within 10, a better military, and 15, more influence as well. The petrodollar is over, and with it, the US economy is done for as well, and it's all American politicians' fault. Hubris regarding money printing, woke politics, and a needless desire to antagonize Russia have brought this downfall. And now, over recent weeks, we've heard of some new developments, a plan straight from Putin's mouth which will well and truly spell the end of America. An alliance to take over the globe, a currency to control it, and a new world order set on nothing short of world domination. But what's actually going on, and is there really any credence to these end of the world predictions? Well, to really understand what this most recent catalyst that sent analysts screaming is, we need to understand what has happened over the last couple of years with regards to the US dollar and American foreign policy. For this, we start with the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the West's response. It's a tired tale now, something we all know about, but as Russian troops crossed the border and fired their weapons, the American-dominated financial system of the world fired back, and it tried to shut Russia's economy down. The Russian central bank has hundreds of billions of dollars worth of assets spread out amongst many banks across the world. 10 billion in gold bars here, 20 billion in euros over there, and 30 billion in US treasuries somewhere else. But at the flick of a switch, suddenly it was as if the Russians had nothing overseas at all. The West swiftly and assuredly seized those assets and passed laws sanctioning anyone and everyone they could, and essentially stole these billions of dollars from the Russian state and put Putin in a bit of a pinch. He had been preparing for this war for quite a long time, stocking up on gold, oil and gas and various other currencies as well aware that the sanctions would follow his orders to attack, but he didn't expect the West to go this far, and it revealed just how much influence and control the West or America actually has over the financial systems of the world. So we see Putin fight back. He institutes his energy war in Europe and threatened to freeze millions over the coming winter, and he begun the process of propping up the ruble by forcing customers to buy Russian oil and gas with his currency and not theirs. This was met with resistance, as you might expect, and it was by no means a slam dunk for Russia. Their financial markets were shot and still are. Their replacement for SWIFT has been lackluster and underwhelming to say the least, and the strong performance of the ruble in the first couple of months following the invasion has now been replaced with a slow and steady decline of the currency, as it's now fallen by more than 20% since its peak. What we see here is basically the West flexing their financial muscles, and the might is impressive, but it's also scary, and it's led to other nations that aren't immediately at threat from the US to worry and try to plan against America just in case the Americans decide to come for them next. Now, with the near fatal risk the US dollar is facing right now, investing is incredibly difficult, and we all want to find a way to protect our wealth. Goldman Sachs report that a typical stock-heavy portfolio is expected to flatline at best over the next year. With the Nasdaq down over 30% for 2022, it seems like everyone has lost money, but there is one silver lining in the form of alternative assets, and according to Deloitte, 85% of wealth managers believe there's an argument for art as a part of a wealth offering. Masterworks buys up an expensive art piece. They then break it down into smaller, affordable shares through the Securities and Exchange Commission. You can read all of the offerings and circulars at the SEC database linked in the description. This isn't crypto or an NFT at all, so don't worry. This is actual fine art from guys like Picasso and Banksy. As of right now, they've sold 9 pieces of art for an average net return of 25% to their investors, and this is throughout the crazy market we've seen since the COVID crash. They've performed so well for their investors that there's now a waitlist to join their platform, but you can skip it by clicking the link in the description of this video, and Masterworks are also working overtime to buy and release more art on their platform to meet the huge demand. I've been working with them for over a year now, and it's great to see so many Stoic Finance subscribers join them and make great returns with Masterworks. To go on ahead and join the thousands of others who have already entered the world of fine art, and skip the waitlist with the link down below in the description for Masterworks. Now, over recent months, we then saw Saudi Arabia and China actually team up together to try and oppose the US dollar's hegemony. The reasons behind it are quite clear. They're growing powers, getting more wealthy and influential by the day, and they want to forge their own destiny for better or for worse. China is dead set on eradicating the Uyghur Muslims and removing any trace of their culture. They've been doing the exact same thing to Tibet for decades now, and of course they're abusing and destroying democracy in Hong Kong too. The Communist Party narrative surrounding Taiwan is as strong today as ever, and the CCP has literally put a time limit on the time they will have invaded and conquered that island nation. These are all bad according to American moral values, and from a Chinese point of view, the West's pesky insistence that human rights exist is only going to ensure tensions between East and West get worse as we move forward. And as for Saudi Arabia, they're also constantly being accused of human rights abuses, with the death penalty for being gay still being ingrained in law, a murderous war in Yemen that's killing thousands, and that's without even mentioning the murder of Khashoggi, which was ordered by the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia himself and sent American and Saudi relations to rock bottom. Apart from their point of view, they wish to rule their country by their own standards of right and wrong, and the risk is that America and the West stand up to them and use their financial might to sway them in a certain direction. So what did China and Saudi Arabia do? Well, they agreed to trade oil with one another and to price those oil deals in Chinese yuan instead of US dollars. This created headlines all around the world at the time because part of the US dollar's strength comes from the fact it is the petrodollar. Oil is obviously important for every nation, we all know that, and for ease of trade, it's all priced and sold in the US dollar, which gives the US an inherent global demand to its currency and basically allows it to print money at a far greater rate than any other nation in history. This was Saudi Arabia and China telling the Americans that they're not omnipotent and their shenanigans won't work on them. Of course, below the surface, this development wasn't as big a deal as the East would have you believe. This deal was only done to prove that it could be done, and most oil sales between the two nations have continued to be priced and transacted in US dollars. To top it all off, those that have been priced in yuan have ultimately still been paid for in dollars too. But China haven't let the reality of these headlines hurt their ego, as they've been continuously pushing this idea further, and in early December, they continue to urge Arab countries to trade their oil and gas in exchange for yuan instead of dollars. Saudi Arabia and China in particular are trying to make a point, to prove that they can operate without US dollars if they need to, and that the US shouldn't overplay its hand. It's an early step, and alone it really wouldn't be worth talking about, but it's a precedent, it's opposition, and it's a trend that we've seen continue and actually explode recently, and that leads us on to the announcement from Putin himself that this video is really about. So what exactly happened? Well, months ago now, Vladimir Putin announced that the BRICS countries of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa are going to be getting together to form a new currency to try and rival the might of the US dollar and end its hegemony. Putin said that they are specifically trying to create a new global reserve currency, a form of money that is so valuable that every government of every country in the world feels obliged to buy up as much as they can to ensure the continued financial stability of their nation. A few months later, and we hear again from Russia, this time from the diplomat Pavel, that these countries are cooperating and will be using their current currencies as a mixed basket to create this new currency to take over the world. As these shadowy figures were making moves behind the scenes, Russia was also working to position its own currency, the ruble, as a stronger asset more desirable to other countries around the world, and they did this with a tool as old as time itself: gold. Back in April of 2022, Russia announced that for the first time in years that the ruble would be pegged to the value of gold, or more specifically, 5,000 rubles would be worth 1 gram of gold. This ended a multi-decade long period where there simply were not any gold-backed currencies around the world, and fiat currencies like the US dollar reigned supreme. At the same time, Russia also announced that those overseas customers buying up Russian natural resources would be required to pay in rubles. And how would they get those rubles? Well, by giving the Russian central bank gold, of course. Now, to be clear, this is not a pure gold standard, but it does help to strengthen and increase the reliability of the ruble, and it also gives us an insight into where Russia and other BRIC nations might be going with their currencies in the future. The third development that we have to work with is that Saudi Arabia and actually the United Arab Emirates are looking to join the BRICS group and work with those other nations to try and assist each other economically, and of course dismantling American hegemony would be a nice little outcome for them as well. Now, what we know at this point is that the BRICS nations are looking to create their own currency to oppose the American dollar and the US in general. We know that Russia has just loosely pegged its currency to the value of gold, and we know that two massive oil-producing nations, Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, are looking to join BRICS as well. Speculation is flowing around that with the addition of these two oil superpowers, BRICS will then have control over a quarter of all land in the entire world, over $1,560 trillion in natural resources wealth, and a population of well over 40% of the planet. With this kind of backing, many believe, and Putin is trying to convince us all, that this currency would be so monumentally important because it would be valued according to the natural resources that its constituent nations control. We've all heard of the petrodollar, and most people understand that a large reason the US dollar is so valuable is because oil trade is completely dominated by the dollar. But what if this new currency not only dominated trade in oil, but also natural gas, coal, copper, iron ore, and almost every other natural resource you can imagine? The implication is clear that this really could turn the world as we know it on its head, and that the process is actually already on its way. A new world order is being built right now, and it's being driven forward by Russia. Now, even though the headlines behind this story are quite insane, there are numerous caveats that need to be considered here, and questions need to be asked as to whether this really is the end of the US dollar. You see, the idea of the petrodollar isn't wrong, it just doesn't tell the full story. The US dollar is so much more than just a tool to trade oil, it's a tool to trade everything. Almost every single product in the world is actually priced in US dollars, to the point where I, a Brit who lives with the pound every single day, pay my employees who live in Europe, Asia, and South America all with US dollars. The American economy dominates the world in every aspect, not just when it comes to trading oil, and that is why it's the global reserve currency. Right off the bat as well, Russia, Saudi Arabia, Brazil, and South Africa are frankly too small countries to be a real threat to the US dollar. Their economies are just not mighty enough, to the point where every single one of them combined isn't even worth a quarter of the American economy. And then there's the fact that new evidence has emerged suggesting authoritarian states overestimate their GDP figures by 40 to 50% each, and so they actually probably aren't even worth 15% of the American economy. As for China, well, that's a problem all on its own. They also lie about their GDP figures, and the true level is about half of the United States' $20 trillion, and yes, many people believe China is going to outpace the US, but they're already seeing demographic collapse because of their one-child policy, and it's expected that in a few decades' time, China's population will literally halve. That's without even mentioning the fact that China is turning more communist by the day, and communism never bodes well for a nation's economy. The simple fact is that these BRICS countries are in no position to take on the US economy and its might, but there is one country I distinctly missed out there that might actually be a problem for the US: India. Now, India within a few years will already be the most populated country in the world, and it's far more likely to turn out as an actual democracy with capitalism driving economic growth and wealth than any of the others. If things go well for India, then in a few decades they might actually be in a position to challenge the US, but that is only in a few decades, and as already mentioned, that doesn't mean BRICS will be able to challenge the US. If you think that China, Russia, or Brazil will happily do as they're told and be the pet of global India, then I don't know why you're even watching this video. The truth is that the US dollar is likely to reign over all of us for decades to come, and when it does finally get replaced, it's incredibly unlikely it will be at the hands of some weird Russian oil and gas-backed ruble or even the Chinese yuan. It will be replaced by the Indian rupee or maybe some random Central African conglomerate, as we are currently witnessing a population explosion there that will change power dynamics all around the world as well. As for China in particular, its economic miracle is dead, or rather, it just never happened. It was a mirage, an illusion, or a lie propagated by the Chinese Communist Party and enabled by useful idiots happy to look the other way, as Chinese labor was cheap and it made them rich. The Communist Party has been demolishing wealth everywhere it can find it, and their only solution is to lie about their true GDP figures. We went in depth into this entire topic for this video here and explained exactly why Xi Jinping's dreams of empire are dead before they ever even started. And if you're a long-time viewer of the channel and used to enjoy the daily market update series we did, well, we're bringing it back in the form of an email newsletter. It takes 10 seconds to sign up and is entirely absolutely free, and we just send out a couple emails a week explaining everything you need to stay up to date on the markets.